Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, please hit that subscribe button. I do crafting and cleaning and just everything mom or updating. So if you like what you see here, hit that subscribe button so that you don't ever miss anything that I post. In today's video, we are putting contact paper down on the countertops in my kitchen. This is a part 2 in the series that I'm doing of updating my rental home. Everything I do in here I have to be able to take off or remove without causing any damage whenever I leave from here. I wanted something in the kitchen that was going to brighten it up a little bit. The countertops are not completely square. The house has settled and the countertops have probably been in here since the original owner was in here. The house that we do rent is the landlord's mother's home. She's no longer living and the house he rents out. So in this kitchen you can see that some of the countertops are not completely square. Some of them are higher on one end than the other because the house has settled. So putting down this contact paper was difficult and it was not laying exactly how we felt like that it should have. When we went to go and put up the backsplash on the walls up behind it, you'll see at the end of the video, you could definitely tell that one countertop was slightly higher than the other one. The house does kind of go to the center a little bit. It kind of sinks down in the middle. So our floors and things like that are not completely flush, but they turned out a lot better than I thought they were going to. With putting down this contact paper, you want to make sure that your countertop is clean, it's dry, there's no crumbs or anything like that. You're definitely going to want to use some sort of scraping tool to make sure that you don't have any air bubbles. You want to make sure that your seams are close together. You don't want them to overlap any, because if you have an overlap, we've noticed that on one of them we actually overlapped them by accident. Not a whole lot, but just a tiny little bit. And when I was cleaning the countertops last night, I noticed that my finger caught it a little bit. So you definitely want to make sure that you don't have any overlap on there, because if you do, then something's going to catch it and it's going to tear it, and then you're going to have to replace that piece. So I definitely would suggest making sure that your edges are butted up as close as you could get them without overlapping them. It's better to have that seam where they're touching together than it is to have that overlap and have the possibility of damaging your contact paper. We did use my Cricut scraping tool just to try to get out some of those air bubbles, and I actually made I don't even know what you would call this. It has a needle in the end of it. It has a handle from one of those, I guess, sponge brushes. You can take and pull the end of it out that has a sponge on it and leaves a hole in there. Just fill it up with some hot glue, stick a sewing needle in there, and it makes the perfect little tool to pop any bubbles that you get on your countertops. I will tell you this though, when you are using the tool to pop the bubbles or using a push pin to pop the bubbles, you want to use something with the smallest little end on it. When you're popping these bubbles, it does leave a texture because you're putting a hole essentially into the contact paper, so you just want to be super careful with doing that. If you do use a scraping tool, make sure that you're using it at an angle and you're doing it lightly, because even though this contact paper is thick, you can still damage your contact paper and getting a hole inside of it by scraping. When you're putting this down, if you have a lip in your countertop like we do, you really want to make sure that you're pushing it all the way down into that little groove, or using something to go along the edge to make sure that you're making the contact paper meet the entire countertop as much as possible, because if you don't, then you're going to get that little air bubble in the back and cause a little pocket. And then once your contact paper is down and you're completely finished, if something bumps that, it's going to put a hole in it. the worst part about this countertop was actually putting the contact paper around the sink. No matter what we did, we had the hardest time getting it to go behind the sink. I'm starting to wish that I had let him try to take the sink up just a little bit to put the contact paper underneath there. It actually didn't turn out too bad, but it was just really difficult to get that contact paper behind the sink itself because the lip is so small. And then having the edge of the contact paper go around the side of the sink, we had to cut out the little piece on the sink and lay it down and tape it. But this was probably the worst part about putting this contact paper down, was having to get it to go behind the sink. Right here you can see where he's using the scraping tool to kind of push all of that up around the sink. We do use a box cutter to go around the sink and cut all of the excess off, and you can see there he's using his thumb and just trying to make sure that there's no air bubbles, and then going back with the scraping tool and the needle tool just to make sure that all those air bubbles are gone. Now when you're cutting around the edge of the sink, you want to make sure that you're pushing that as close to the sink as you can possibly get, even around those edges, even if you have to heat it up, because the mistake that we made was because it was so wrinkly around the edges, around like the circular part of it, we weren't able to cut it as closely as we would have liked, and so we ended up having a little piece where the edge of it came off, and the caulk that we used did not cover that up like I thought it was going to. I don't know if it was just a cheaper caulk and there was no pigment to it or anything like that. So just make sure that when you're doing that, you're cutting it as close as humanly possible to the sink, just so that it covers up all of those edges. you can see what I mean about it not getting close enough and then missing little pieces of it. Otherwise, on that side, it looked pretty good. We had very minimal bubbles, and I think he did a really good job of making sure that it matched up along the edge of the sink. And right here you can see that he's trying to like make sure that it's getting pushed into underneath the little cubby hole that we have there, as well as making sure that the backing was matched up to the little dip in the backsplash of the sink. When we were doing this around the sink, I thought that the other side was the hardest part, that this over here was going to be easier because more of the countertop was exposed than the sink. But it actually turns out that the countertop that we're covering on this side, because we did not cut that piece of the contact paper straight, it actually ended up being crooked. And because we lined it up the way that we did, it just made a huge mess, and we ended up having a crooked piece of contact paper go down, and then on the other end of the countertop we actually had a 1/4 of an inch on the very corner of it where the dishwasher is, and it was just completely crooked and did not turn out how we expected it to. So that actually is what ended up causing the weird looking edge that you'll see here in a few minutes. up another piece of the contact paper just to see what it was going to look like. We were going to tape it down, but then we realized that we actually had that piece crooked, and it wasn't until we got it completely down that we noticed exactly how bad it was. So you see me pushing down right here, trying to get it all laid down. He's telling me there that, you know, he's going to trim around that and he'll get that in just a second. But then once we peel off the rest of this backing and we get it completely down, we see that it's actually overlapping on the other piece of contact paper, and we realize that where it's overlapping, that's how much of a gap we were going to have on the other side. He did fix this piece where we don't have any overlapping, but then when we put down the rest of the contact paper, we see exactly how bad it is. This is another example of why you want to make sure that you try to get as close as you can to the sink, and you want to make sure that your contact paper is pushed all the way up against the sink. If not, then you're going to end up with some gappage like you see here. So we knew that we were going to have some uneven pieces, but we still went ahead and put down the other two pieces anyway, just to see how much of a gap we were going to have. this is when we realized exactly how bad it was going to be. We lined up the pieces and went ahead to tape them down. We also realized on this piece that there was a tear or a cut in the center of the roll, which ended up being on this piece where it was cut completely through the vinyl and the backing, and a piece of the contact paper was also warped a little bit, so we ended up having to throw this entire 30-inch piece away. And you're about to see what that piece looked like. We actually ended up replacing the end piece where you see him cutting now. We replaced the long 30-inch piece there, and we used the scrap piece that we had thrown away that had a cut in it to put on the edge here, and it actually turned out pretty decent. We were able to salvage that corner by using the piece of contact paper that we had tossed. We just kind of pulled it back apart and stuck it along the edge there, and he was able to use it to cover that end. This section of the countertop was probably the easier of the pieces to do. We only had 2 whole pieces to put down here. Then we went to the little piece on the other side of the stove. You'll see here in just a bit. But right now he's just taking the box cutter and going along the top and getting any kind of caulking or anything that was on the top of the counters, because like I said, these countertops have probably been in here since the beginning with this house. They're really old, and I'm pretty sure that they were put in when my landlord's mother still lived here, because underneath the small piece of the countertop it actually has her last name on there. So we're just cleaning up anything that's been on the countertops for years so that the contact paper will stick up there on the top, so that we don't have anything peeling up over the next couple of months or year, however long that we're here and we decide to keep these countertops. this side of the countertop, I decided to let him do more of the laying with the contact paper, and I would just go behind and pop some of the bubbles and just let him do his thing, making sure that the contact paper was going down how it was supposed to. As we went on through this project, we were just sick of contact paper at this point, but it got a little bit easier as you go along because you kind of have a process you develop, like putting down the painter's tape and just making sure that the lines and the seams and everything are matching up. This section right here was probably the best seam so far. I will tell you though that if you are debating or thinking about putting down contact paper on your countertops in your rental, you definitely want to have a second set of hands to help you put down the contact paper, just because it makes life a little bit easier. You can have someone smoothing, someone pulling back the backing, someone to help you line it up, to put the tape down, to be able to cut the rolls. Just having that second set of hands to help you along the way is going to be really useful, and it's going to be very beneficial in making sure that these countertops look good when you're completely finished. We were really excited when we found out that this part of the countertop came off. It made life so much easier when we were putting the contact paper down. It was easy to cut around the edges, and it just made life easier in general to put this piece together and put it back into the little cubby hole. At this point, I don't know who was more excited, me or Ray, just because we were in the final pieces and getting this put together. And I think at this point we were both just tired of contact paper. We were tired of countertops, and we were just kind of over it and wanted to be done already. But I'm glad that we didn't stop and give up on it, because it actually turned out really super pretty. So the extra piece that we would have had, instead of having to throw away the first piece that we used over on the corner where the cut was in the contact paper, it would have went here. And since we didn't have that extra piece, we had to go through all the scrap pieces that we had and see what we could put down on this little piece here. This piece of the countertop was not very long, but we didn't have a piece of scrap that would even fit there. So we ended up using this small piece that you see here, and we ended up using the little flap there that's on the corner where the countertop is kind of cut at an angle. There's a little triangle piece there that we actually ended up using. We cut it off, and then we ended up cutting the edge of it on some scrap backing just to be able to get a straight line on there so that we could fill in that little triangle piece. This is what I mean using the scrap backing. You can take and line it up on the grid lines that's on the back side of the paper. Just make sure that you're putting it on the like slick side, because if you put it on the other side, your contact paper is going to stick to the paper. But just use those grid lines, line it up, and you can cut a straight line to go into any little piece that you need to kind of fix, or any lines that you need to straighten up. You can do that using the lines on the back of the grid paper. So right here you see we're just taking and covering up along the edge of the countertop. The contact paper that we used is actually scrap pieces that we had from where we cut off the other pieces, and just pieces that were left on the end. So we ended up using 2 pieces along the straight edge there, and then we used 1 piece on the back of the backsplash. Now when we were putting the contact paper along the edges here where his elbow is at, the grain actually went a different way, but that really didn't bother me. So I told him to go ahead and put that piece on there, even though the grain was going a different direction, because nobody's going to notice anyway. I don't even think to look at the edge of the countertops to see if the grain is going the same way. If you're not looking for those mistakes, then you're not really going to notice them. So just make sure that when you're doing it, your grain matches up on the top of the countertop. It doesn't really matter though on the edges, because like I said, you're going to use such a small amount of it anyway, it's not even going to matter. are by no means a pro at doing this. We are experimenting with this, and this is our first time, so I'm just trying to let you guys in on the mistakes that we made so that you don't make the same ones. So I'm just showing you guys here some of the mistakes that we made, just some little hiccups and little boo-boos. That's actually how that corner ended up turning out. Looks really gross, but it's okay. It's over here where nobody's gonna see it, so it doesn't really matter anyway. And the thing about it is, you know, if you really want to fix it, you can always go back and take all of the contact paper off, buy new, and just redo it. But the thing about it is nobody's going to see it on that side, and I was happy with it. And I think the kitchen still overall looks amazing. You can see here that I've put up some backsplash. I actually got that from Dollar General. It's $10 a pack, and it has, I believe, 6 squares in it. It's not really meant for the wall, but if you take and stick it on some towels or something that has lint on it, just to kind of take some of the sticky away, it doesn't really stick that well to the wall, I guess. I just wanted to make sure that anything I put in this kitchen when I got ready to leave, I could take off, and it just made the kitchen look so much cuter having that as the backsplash. And you can't really see the grease on the flat paint on the walls, so that's what we ended up doing there. I didn't put any over there where the cereal jars are, just because I didn't want to have to go and buy a whole nother pack just for one. But overall, I think the countertops turned out really good. You really can't see the seams all that well. You don't see any of the mistakes that we made unless I point them out to you. So overall, I think the counter turned out really good. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notification bell so that you don't ever miss an upload. And comment down below and let me know what you think of my new kitchen. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Bye.